Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Revision to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation and Treaty 3 territory. With me today, attended by Zoom, is Robert Hutchings. Gisela Beppo is here with us at the meeting room. My name is Harvey Diamond. The City of Winnipeg Assessment Department is represented by Jonathan Spacek, and our hearing secretary is Stephen Lund. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rules in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested to be described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and when speaking to the matters as they sworn in, be advised that comparisons and assessments of properties are not considered as evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessment value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property address with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will be given an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. And once all evidence that part of an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The person will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all cases have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make decisions. We receive the Board's order by written mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of a public record. And today we'll be hearing matters 2 through 8. And Mr. Lund, you can swear in the parties. Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jonathan Spacek.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Applicant, if you please stand. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Carry on from all this.
Thank you.
Okay, our first item on the agenda today is 1313 Border Street, and Mr. Spacek, you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Carrie and I actually have a agreement on this one, so I'll read the roll number 0701004730. This is 1313 Border Street. It's currently assessed at a total value of $16,079,000, and that is split. So $2,058,000 of that is currently school exempt, and $14,021,000 of that is currently taxable. Carrie and I have come to an agreement, and I'm making a recommendation to reduce that value to, just load up the right thing here, $15,051,000 total assessment, and that would be $12,944,060 taxable and $2,107,000 40S school exempt.
Okay. And Mr. Reimer, that's acceptable to you.
We're in agreement. Yep.
Okay. Mr. Hutchings, do you have any questions?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what property we're on.
Oh, sorry, we're on the agenda number 2. We're not hearing 1 today, I understand. It's been withdrawn. So,
One is withdrawn. Okay, thank you.
so it's 1313 Border Street.
Right, okay. That was my only question. Thank you.
Okay. It's an important one.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I'm just wondering if you could run the numbers by me one more time. I didn't catch them all as you were going through them.
Absolutely. Let me just load that up. It is a total value of $15,051,000. That means $12,944,000 of that is taxable, and $2,107,000 of that is school exempt.
Thank you very much.
And they don't have questions either, so we can go on next with the next item on the agenda, which is agenda number 3. I think it's 5 St. James Street. And Ms. Smashik, when you're ready on that, you can proceed.
Thank you. If everyone would turn to my page 1 of my brief, we're at 500 St. James. This is roll number 07569092500. We have a 2023 assessment at $3,849,000. This property, if you look at my page 2, you will see it's a 2-story, what we have classified as a suburban office OFS. It was built in 2 pieces. So the original building at the south portion of the property was built in 1991, and the addition, which is the north portion of the building, it was built in 2014. So they had an addition. So this, if you add it all together, you have a total leasable area of 18,086 square feet. Then you'll see by my pictures. So you can see by the pictures there on page 3, the portion that has the balcony there, you're at the south end of the portion, that's the original building. And if you turn to my page 2 at the bottom, all the portion of the building with the darker windows, and to the north there, that's the newer addition. You can see at the bottom of page 3 there's a parking lot, and also in part of that addition was including a parkade. So you have the ramp that goes down to the parkade, and that includes 13 parking stalls in addition to all the outdoor parking. If you turn to my page 4, I've just put a note. There is a reported net lease of $17 a square foot. You can see that on page 11 once we get there. And for the actual valuation of this property, page 5, you'll see we have a PST parking structure. And just I don't believe there's any contention with this value, but just so you know how it's created, we have 13 stalls at a net rate of $63 per stall. Per month, and that gives you an annual rent of $9,828. And our parking structure capitalization rates for 2023 is 7%. So that works out to $140,000 for the parking stall, for that parking structure, and the rest of the value is the office, which is on my page 6. And you'll see we have all 18,086 square feet. So this is the first and second floor together for a total rent of $14 a total rate of $14.92 a square foot. We have our standard OFS vacancy of 6%. We have expenses at 3% for 2023. So you'll notice that the expenses went up from 2 to 3%. After analyzing to help take into account to some of those increased costs of COVID, you'll notice those non-recoverable expenses went up to 3%. We have a shortfall that also increased to $8 a square foot to help cover the higher some of the higher vacancy that was reported from COVID. So you'll notice it helps to take into account the costs of holding that vacant space, and we've also increased that a bit to help cover that. You'll see an overall capitalization rate of 6.4% for this OFS, model driven, and that gives us a total value of $3,709,000 for the office portion. If you turn to my page 7, I've just included some OFS rent comparables. You'll notice from top to bottom, comp 1 to 14, they are sorted by size. So I did try to look for some larger OFS net leases just to see what is the going rate for space these days for such a pretty large size. So our subject property is 18,086 square feet. You'll see my first comparable is at 1558 Wilson. This is a lease signed in 2018 for 24,825 square feet, and it's a net rate of $15. You'll notice our rent is $14.92, which is model driven. Second comparable, don't look at that's actually the lease from our subject property. If you look at comparable 3, we have 1400 Taylor. This is again an OFS built in 1976, had some renovations to give it an effective year of 1991. It has 18,242 square feet, and it's at $13.91. And this lease was signed in 2017. And then we have a few leases from 850 to 890 Pembina, comparable 4 through 6. And you'll see those lease sizes range from 14 to 15,000 square feet, and the values range from 15 to 1792 a square foot. Again, and those are some newer built buildings, so you can see those are a little more comparable to our subject property, which again, original portion built in 1991, but the majority portion of the building built in 2014. If we turn to, just under there, again, just some comparable parking structure rates. But again, from my understanding, not in contention, so I won't go deep into those. But if you have any questions on those, let me know. And I've just included the mailer on page 12, which again, it just includes a reported net rent for all the space. And then we have statement of earnings, which have some revenue and expenses. And then if you turn to page 13, something new this cycle is we've included a COVID questionnaire for business owners. And you'll see if it's filled out, this one is filled out, it's included. I'll just go through it once so everybody understands going forward what's included in them. But the option on question 1 on page 13 is, please indicate the extent to which COVID-19 pandemic and related public health measures have impacted the operation of this property. You have 4 options: has not impacted, minor impact, moderate impact, or significant. This owner or property manager filled out moderate impact. And then question 2, were tenants at this location closed temporarily due to public health measures? No. Question 3, have any of the existing tenants closed permanently as direct result of COVID-19? No. Question 4, in 2020, has the property experienced an increase in operating expenses in response to COVID-19? And they put yes. And then they briefly explain that safety items purchased to accommodate public health guidelines, approximately $12,154. Were the increased expenses successfully passed on to the tenant? So they put no, so we have an increased cost for the owner. Did the property incur non-recoverable capital expenses related to health and safety? Same thing, they put yes, and then they the same thing, the safety items purchased to accommodate public health guidelines. Question 6, have existing tenants requested rent deferral or rent abatements resulting from COVID? No. And then if we look at page 14, the end of my brief, we just have 4 more questions. Question 7 that we've asked all owners is, between January 1st, 2020 and April 1st, 2021, were new leases negotiated after the effects of COVID became apparent? No. 8, have any of the existing leases been amended as a result of COVID? No. Question 9, have any tenants abandoned or breached the terms of their leases as a direct result of COVID-19? Answer, no. And question 10, has the property received any government-funded assistance grants or financial support associated with COVID-19? No. So again, just went over that one in detail, so anyone's going forward, have heard, but that's my brief. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Reimer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple. Mr. Spacek, could we go to your page 7, please?
Absolutely. Page 7, I am there.
The rent comparables, okay.
Yes.
Now, you've mentioned the mailer, and certainly we're in no way disputing that the mailer was sent in. But a question I had for you is, were you aware that the landlord and tenant are affiliated companies and it's a holdco-opco situation?
So let me just look one sec here. I was not aware, no. I just want to, it's just so the owner and I did look to see if the owner was the same as the tenant, and I didn't see a relation, but I didn't do a company search or anything. So I'm unaware of any relation between the two.
Fair enough. So then looking at your chart at the top of page 7, and Mr. Chairman, Mr. Spacek's bang on, and there's no dispute as to the parking valuation. So this is just focused on the building valuation. So comp number 2, that's the subject.
Yes.
I can confirm that. Now, so where we are with this property, this is basically when you pass Polo Park on Portage Avenue, you would actually turn south on St. James and head to the southern end of the street there to get to this property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And with respect to the lease comparables, from what I reviewed, what I see is 2 comparables that are in the sort of general vicinity of the subject, and that's comps 11 and 12 on Ness and Border. Would you agree those are the closest in geography to the subject?
Those are the closest, absolutely.
Okay. And they're at 13 and 12 bucks respectively, correct?
Correct.
Now, the non-recoverable, I'll make my presentation, Mr. Spacek. We've sort of gone through that ad nauseum, so I'm not going to ask any questions on it. 3%, to summarize, is the model. That's the rate that was applied within the modeled assessments for 2023 for all.
Yes, yes, true.
Okay. Lastly, then the capitalization rate. So you've got a cap rate of 6.4%. Again, you alluded to it. That's a model rate, correct?
Absolutely.
And the department, if I go briefly to your page 10, there's a chart sort of in the bottom half of that page, and it includes, of course, the capitalization rates that were applied by the department or that were found by the department for office properties. Now, the department hasn't given you any specific capitalization rate information other than this chart, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, you know what? I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchings, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Spacek, is the effective year of this building 2014?
So what we have is a effective year between the two portions. The original portion that was built, the effective year we have on that is 2005. So it was built in 1991, but it's been renovated over the years and it's been effectively upgraded to 2005. Okay. And then the newer portion that was built in 2014 has the original 2014 year as it's it hasn't been adjusted, so its effective year is its original year built of 2014.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is location. So we're located south of Portage Avenue, between Portage Avenue and the Assiniboine River. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
By Wolseley. Okay, I've got it now. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I'm wondering about your comparable number 11 at 1600 Ness Avenue. And my question is, the original building was built in 1986 with an upgrade in 2000?
So, yeah, comparable 11, that's the way I put that. I'm showing it is it was originally built in 1986, and then we as a department have an effective year of 2000 put on it. So there has been some sort of renovations done that we determined it should have a higher effective year.
Okay, thank you very much.
And my question, Mr. Spacek, is on the cap rate. I'm looking at your chart on page 10.
Yes.
And I'm looking at offices. I'm just wondering where in that chart is the cap rate for this property derived from?
So the information we're showing here on the first under office, so the first grouping of properties, you have downtown A, you have OFA, OFB, OFS, OFS. This would be in a suburban, I mean, we have no difference between the suburban A and suburban B. We just have OFS, but you'll see it ranges our 20th to 80th percentile, ranges from 5.6 to 6.9. This property is at 6.4%. So we're within our 20th percentile, and then you'll notice that Collier's, CBRE, and Cushman and Wakefield have their ranges for suburban B OFSs ranging from 6 to 6.75, 7 to 7.5, and 6.75 to 7.5 respectively.
Okay, so based on what I see here, this property would be somewhere a little bit past the middle then of properties.
For our range of OFSs this cycle, yeah, it's kind of closer to the middle of it's right in between our 20th and 80th percentile.
Yeah, so the best property would be capitalized at 5.6 and the worst at 6, or an 80%.
In theory, there'll be some under that 20th percentile that might be below 5.6, but they'll be pretty rare. But then our kind of overall better ones will be 5.6, and then our overall higher ones will be at that 80th percentile around 6.9. Like that's the majority will be between those.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Mr. Ryman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this submission involves the initial brief, but also then the non-recoverable expense study and the capitalization rate study. I'd propose to just go through those standard documents one time for the purposes and just ask that be carried forward.
We appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll carry forward.
All right. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Spacek then to turn to page 2 of our initial submission. So this is the property of 494 St. James, or 500 St. James Street, I should say. And I can confirm the question I posed to Mr. Spacek was whether there was an awareness of the affiliation between the holding company, in this case, and the operating company. And I can state categorically there is. It is a holdco-opco situation. Now, I find Mr. Spacek had talked about the effective age in response to Ms. Rempel's question. We actually had, by our review of the department's records, a total effective age of 2005. So I'm going to come back to that briefly. And Mr. Spacek, if you believe I'm misinterpreting the data that I'm reviewing, then please say so. But I believe the department has assigned an overall effective age of 2005. So we've got the assessment of $3,849,000 under debate this morning, and we're requesting a value of $3,412,000. As mentioned, the parquet valuation is not in dispute. It's only the valuation of the main holding. So if I could then ask the board members and Mr. Spacek to turn to page 9. So just by way of brief description, this is the property of 500 St. James, and there is the original building and the addition that Mr. Spacek's referred to. We actually had that in 2013. Mr. Spacek had mentioned 2011, so was certainly within that timeline somewhere. And the upper area is 18,086 square feet, zone C2 commercial. So then I'm going to cut to the heart of the issues in this case. If I could then ask the board to turn to page 13, please. So with respect to the rental rate we're suggesting, it's not a huge difference we're suggesting, but we are suggesting an overall rental rate of $14 a square foot as a blended rate for both the main floor area and the second floor area. Typically, certainly it's been my experience that the main floor will rent for a higher rate than upper floor space, but we've taken the premise as one unit and applied the blended rate of $14. That is based on the comparables you see in the chart on page 13. All of the comparables, recall that I'd asked Mr. Spacek in his forthright in his comments as to the location of the comparables in the department's materials. All of these comparables are located in the same general area on Portage, Border, and Wellington. And as you can see there, and some of them are main floor tenancies and some are upper floor, and that's also indicated in the chart. So the rental rate that we have reviewed starts at a low of $8 a foot up to $15.50 a foot. And certainly, and you know, to be clear, I've been in this building, and it's a good quality building, so we're picking an overall blended rent that is at the upper end of the range, and I think that's justified. But we do believe that the department's modeled rent is, especially given the circumstances as of April 1, 2021, is a little bit optimistic for this property. So we're applying a $14 rate based on a review of the lease comparables you see there. Vacancy allowance is not under debate. Shortfall rate is not under debate. Then the non-recovered expenses, I will speak to that and the separate document very shortly. We are in summary suggesting that the non-recoverable expense allowance should be increased from 1% to 5%, along with what's historically been known as the other expense or structural expense at 2%. So we're suggesting a total non-recoverable expense allowance of 7% of the effective gross income. Capitalization rate, we're applying a slightly higher rate of 6.5%. Again, we're trying to recognize this building and the fact that it's a good quality building, it's got sufficient parking and such. So we are choosing a rate that is at the lower end of our indicated rates that I'll discuss from our cap rate study. The key, Mr. Chairman, the key point in the interplay between these two factors is extremely important. Our capitalization rate study actually incorporates the 5% and 2% allowances together. If one, and I'm going to go through this briefly, but if one removes, or I shouldn't say remove, but reduces the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5% to 1%, that has a direct impact on our capitalization rates, and it has the effect of typically bumping them up by between 38 and 40 points. And I'll speak to that shortly. But the reason I'm stressing this is it's absolutely critical to value the properties for the purposes of the capitalization rate in a similar manner to what we're valuing this morning. And the removal or reduction of that rate does mathematically have that direct effect on our capitalization rate conclusions. And we'd ask the board to consider that in their deliberations. So with all that being said then, on page 15, you can see our suggested value for this property. Again, based on the $14 rent, working it through with the 7% total expense, non-recoverable expense factor, and a cap rate of 6.5%. We then come in at a value for the building itself of $3,272,000 rounded. With the addition of the parking structure, we then arrive at a total value of $3,412,000 for this property. Mr. Spacek's done a very good job going through the income expense questionnaire, so I'm not going to belabor that. And as I say, it's a whole co-optical situation. So to be clear, we put no weight on that rental rate based on the affiliation of the two companies. But I would ask the board, and Mr. Spacek, this is where I'm asking you, if you believe I've misinterpreted something, please let me know. If I could ask the board members and Mr. Spacek to turn to page 18 of our materials. I'd mentioned earlier in reply to Ms. Memple's question, the effective age for the property, and what we have at the top of that page is you can see the row called overall effective year built, and for the OFS component, the overall year built, and that's what we had sort of considered in our analysis as 2005. So I'd suggest, notwithstanding Mr. Spacek's comments, I suggest it appears that the department put an overall effective age of 2005 on the property in this case. So with all that being said, I am going to, Mr. Chairman, I'll be guided by you, but I'm going to suggest I'm going to take the non-recoverable study at a very high level because this has been, as I say, debated and discussed at some length for several years now. So I'll just touch on sort of the high points. Mr. Chairman, if I could ask the board members and Mr. Spacek to open the non-recoverable expense study and let me know when you're there. Everybody good? Okay. So on page 1 then, or sorry, PDF, the PDF page 2. What we're suggesting, and I know this has been a matter of contention between certainly all of us in the department seems to be taking the view that the management, quote unquote, management expenses are recovered, and without question, in the vast majority of the cases they are. We do not in any way dispute it, but what we're suggesting is that this allowance was never intended to, notwithstanding the sort of the name that was, or the moniker that was used for the expense, what the expense was intended to be was an allowance for the non-recoverable expenses that an owner, using prudent, competent judgment and management, the non-recoverable expenses that will come up. And there's typically 3 that we looked at. The single biggest one is leasing commissions, then you've got professional fees and marketing and advertising. So those are there's others that can come up, but those are the main 3. So then with all of that in mind, if we could turn briefly to page 8, or that would be not, sorry, page 9 of the page 7. I got to do my math right. I'm looking from the hard copy rather than the PDF file.
Okay, so
it would be page 9. Yep, it would be page 9. I promise to get my mental math together here. Page 9, there should be roughly halfway down the page an item marked C, non-recoverable expense allowance. And the non-recoverable expense allowance inclusions and exclusions for assessment purposes. And so this is where we list all the different non-recoverable expenses that can arise. As you can see there, leasing commissions, tenant improvements, free rent, marketing, advertising, professional fees, owner building maintenance, because of course the owner does have to pick up the structural maintenance. Those are almost always not recovered from tenants. And then some other types of expenses that typically arise. Now we're not, for obvious reasons, we're not including things like financing fees and mortgage interest. We're specifically not including in our 5% calculation or conclusion the owner building maintenance, because that would properly be placed in the category of the quote unquote other expense, which historically has been relating to the to the replacement reserve and the capital work. So we did not include that in our analysis. If you turn then to page 10, under the heading D, again halfway through the page, these are the 4 categories that we focused on: was leasing commissions, professional fees, asset management fees where they exist, and advertising marketing. So then on page 11, this is now the updated chart. This chart was actually updated from the previous version for the 2020 cycle. So we have updated the materials to reflect the to reflect the more current expenses that we noticed in the income statements. And again, as you can see from the chart, there's a lot of variation, and that stands to reason, because certainly there's some, and leasing commissions is a great example, where in some years, if you have a very large vacancy that you are attempting to fill, the leasing commission for the commercial agents for that kind of space and the significant rent that would be generated by it, leasing commissions in that particular year will be very high, unless, and the only caveat to that is if some very sophisticated landowners that actually amortize the leasing commission over the term of the lease to properly match the commission expense to the revenue that's being generated. So it can be done that way, but a lot of folks, they just expense it in the year that it was incurred. So you will see from a low of 2.6% up to 16.23%. The right-hand column I've also given for the board's information the same percentages if one includes TIs. We are not including though in our conclusions. We are not including TIs. It would result in a significantly higher indicated expense allowance, but we are not including that particular item when we come to our conclusions. So we are asking then, I'm going to then go to page 12, and this was the comments I had made earlier with respect to the relationship between the non-recoverable expenses and capitalization rate. So what you're going to see in a few minutes in our capitalization rate submission is that we have included the 5% plus the 2%, so a total non-recoverable expense allowance of 7%. And again, Mr. Chairman, I stress that if one reduces the 5% non-recoverable expense allowance, that has, by necessity, a direct impact on the cap rate, and the effect on that is to raise our cap rates, as I say, between typically 38 and 40 points. So with the inclusion, and I've set out an example, if we then turn to page 13. So on page 13, the example that we've set out is, and this is just a notional example, but to give the board an idea of the effect of the reduction of the non-recoverable expense. We've got an income, a potential rent that we're suggesting of $1 million. The vacancy allowance is 5%. The non-recoverable expense allowance in this example is 5%. Then an additional 2% for the what I'm going to call the structural allowance, shortfall rate of $7, and then a purchase price of $11.5 million. So that's the theoretical scenario. When you look at the valuation, then at the bottom half of page 12, you'll see it's including the 5%, and the indicated cap rate with those assumptions is 7.38%. Now, if you turn to the next page, actually, you know what? I'm going to go forget the next page because that's the example of where it goes to 0. So let's turn to page 15, please. Page 15 is the very same valuation factors, the very same sale price, save and except for, pardon me, a reduction in the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5% to 1%. And as you can see there, the capitalization rate using the exact same parameters, but with just that one change, goes from 6.38% to 7.38% to 7.71%. So certainly that again, mathematically is the impact of reducing the expense allowance. And when it comes time to consider Altus Group's capitalization rate submission, I'm asking the board to bear that in mind. Certainly there's a direct relationship between the two. The structural allowance, again, I've included that as part of our submission in the following pages, but I won't dwell on it. We're maintaining the 2% for that component. So I recognize that was a higher level presentation, but I know that the board members and Mr. Spacek have heard this many times further. Happy to answer any questions, but I'll, for the purposes of the presentation and brevity, I'll leave it at that for the moment. Now the last submission, again, this is document 3 of 3, the capitalization rate study. So Mr. Chairman, if you might let me know when you're there. Everyone's good?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're of course doing here is applying an overall capitalization rate. We're not doing a DCF. So the direct capitalization rate is applied, and just briefly on page 2 of the document, in the middle of the page, direct capitalization is used when properties are already operating on a stabilized basis and there's ample supply or comparable sales with similar risk levels, incomes, expenses, physical and locational characteristics, and future expectations. Future expectations is going to be something certainly that we are going to talk about in the context of the cap rate study, but that's the method. The OCR method is what we're using this morning. So then, very briefly, if we turn to page 5, and what you'll hear, Mr. Chairman, in my submission is there's sort of 2 timelines that we're looking at. The first timeline being what was sort of happening in the office market leading up to the onset of the pandemic. The other thing, of course, that I'm going to speak to is the profound effect in our submission that the pandemic had on particularly office, retail and office were hit. Hospitality was obviously hit very, very hard. But the impact of the pandemic and future expectations, the principles of anticipation, we suggest the pandemic had a very, very pronounced effect on capitalization rate expectations in the Winnipeg market and in all the real estate markets throughout the country. So the first few pages, and I'm now on page 5, we do take a quick sort of look at what was sort of happening leading up to the pandemic. And as you can see, I'm not going to dwell on the numbers because the actual cap rates quoted by the brokerage firms could quite bluntly recalculate our capitalization rates in a different manner. But the key for this chart is the trends and what was happening between 2016 and 2018. According to the broker reports, the trending was virtually flat. There was neither much of an compression nor much of an increase in the capitalization rates. Then turning to page 6, these are the capitalization rate, and Mr. Chairman, I'm guessing you've seen this a few times in the previous cycle, and the other board members, and certainly Mr. Spacek. These are the capitalization rate comparables that we had submitted in the previous assessment for the sort of the pre-pandemic indicators, and they range from a low, as you can see there, from 6.49% up to a high of 8.94%. So that was the general range, and those were the transactions we considered. The conclusions then at the top of page 7, and again, this is pre-pandemic, but the conclusions we came to, as you can see on the chart, for suburban offices specifically, which is the last row on that chart, we concluded that 6.25% to 7.5% would be a typical range. One needs to make site-specific adjustments based on the nature of the asset, the quality of the covenant, all of these things that an investor would take into consideration. But as a general range, that was our suggestion for valuations as of April 1, 2018. Now then, if we turn to page 8, I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, that the pandemic would have a very substantial effect on certainly the office valuations, both downtown and suburban. And with the onset of the pandemic, and we'll all remember this very well, we were certainly in a position where working from home became the norm for a very long time. And as of April 1 of 2021, we were certainly still in the thick of that. There was optimism due to the vaccines, but certainly the work from home model was very much the predominant model. And so that's the circumstance in which we find ourselves in terms of what we're looking at, the conditions we're looking at. Now, the key though, you can have certainly an optimistic view of the office market because of the vaccines, and this is all great and we're all returning to work, but that wasn't the case. What was coming out of the pandemic is that the work from home model was creating basically what was viewed to be more than likely than not a fundamental permanent shift to a more hybrid work arrangement. In the bottom half of page 8, the Western Investor article in December of 2020 says in Winnipeg, the office vacancy rate is around 13%, just higher, slightly higher than 19, but the outlook for this year is uncertain. The wild card, of course, was the addition of True North Square that added 350,000 feet, and then, of course, the plans to build a further tower of 300,000 square feet for Wawanesa. In the next paragraph, like all Western cities, Winnipeg saw a negative lease up in 2020 with 26,000 feet coming back to the market. And further, many tenants have opted for short-term leases or extensions of existing leases. And they do say that office net leasing rates are holding steady in Winnipeg, rising to 16.5 a square foot as a general stat for the office properties generally. Now, I talked about the hybrid work model, and just above that, and I didn't reference it, I should have at the time, but in the first paragraph, we did note the Avison Young report in the first quarter of 2021 that stated that 67% of employees want to work in a manner that's more balanced. That transcends to the return to the office where flexibility and choice are key. What you will see very shortly is that concept being very, very clearly reinforced with a survey that Altus did from very sophisticated investors and their perception of what the market would look like going into the future. That's then starting on page 9, and it's called the Altos Group Key Assumption Survey. It's from November of 2020. Our company conducted actually 3 surveys in April, July, and November of 2020 to get the market opinions of professionals from the top real estate investors, pension funds, life insurance companies, some of the larger private companies and brokers, just to get a real sense of what the players in the market, what they were thinking, what they were projecting going into the future. And what the results indicated is that in the context, and now I'm in the sort of the italicized bullet points, in the context of increased vacancy and anticipated hike in sublease space, landlords will try to maintain face rates by adding more incentives, which stands to reason. Overall leasing in the Q4 of 2020 was very low, especially in the central business district. Benefiting from the emergence of the densification hub and spoke office model, leasing activity in the suburbs is faring better than the core. So certainly that's a factor that we considered when we selected our cap rate, the 6.5% in this case. But one has to not still operate in isolation. Certainly the downtown office market, it was very, very clear what was going on. And with the suburban market, it was perhaps less pronounced, but that uncertainty was still certainly there. At the bottom of page 9, what the survey indicated, and this is a key number, was that 57% of the respondents, these investors in office properties, expected tenants to downsize their space in the future. So that's certainly a function of that hybrid model that is becoming very apparent as a reference date. Then turning to page 10, there's some very some very informative charts, and it gets to some of the key points I'm talking about. First, at the top of page 10, do you expect office tenants to downsize their space requirements as a result of the increase in WFH, which is work from home, and the increase in work from home brought on by the pandemic? And fully 57% of these respondents said yes. And even more interesting, the bottom chart, how much do you estimate? Certainly the between 10 and 30%, which is the two charts, or the 2 bar graphs towards the left of that chart, was a significant number. Less than 10%, there was also a significant number. Not many, though, thought it would be more than 30%, so that level of pessimism wasn't there. But certainly when you're talking about an expectation, and this was both, as you can see, for downtown and suburb offices, when you see the expectation and the numbers that high of between 10 and 30%, that is certainly a very, very striking conclusion for our purposes. Face rates, then on page 11, the vast majority of the respondents, there was certainly a significant number that said expected no change, but many expected a decrease in that 5% range, with some expecting between 5 and 10 or even 10 plus. But certainly, as you can see there was not no expectation, but very, very little expectation that rents would increase. And that, again, is a function of the economic circumstances brought on by the pandemic for this market. The majority of respondents, and I'm at the bottom of page 11 now, the majority of respondents were of the opinion that office cap rates would increase in 2021. The percentage of those expecting an increase was greater in November than in June. November was 40%, June is 27%. The majority felt that the office rates, and I'm moving on to page 12 now, would increase between 25 and 50 basis points for good quality assets. And again, I stress, there's no doubt that this is a good quality asset, so the higher increase expected for the lower quality assets, that wouldn't apply here. And then we've got the 2 charts that sort of graphically indicate the conclusions and the responses of the folks that were surveyed. And certainly for the higher quality office, the expectation of the 25 to 50 basis point increase was by far the largest, where the largest number of respondents were placed. Moving on briefly then to page 13, we've got just an informative graph there of the historical office cap rates for the different asset categories. And in all of this, it's interesting because, of course, the Bank of Canada rate was at historic lows as of the reference date and leading up to it. And that, of course, was also a function of a very deliberate policy to try, in what amounted to unprecedented circumstances, to try and keep the economy going as far as that policy would permit. And that's precisely what happened. But again, for our purposes, we stress that certainly given the risk, given what was apparent as far as the mindset of the investors, that will then typically translate to just a larger spread between the Bank of Canada's rates and the actual capitalization rates that we see in the market. And we suggest that's what was happening here, as illustrated with the graphs on page 14. Now, very briefly on page 15, I talked earlier about the brokerage firms pre-pandemic. Again, I'm not looking at the numbers. I am, however, bringing this to the attention of the board with the updated chart to have consideration of the trends. And as you can see in that chart, the trending for the various office components typically range between 25 and 50 basis points, which was consistent with the respondents with the Altus survey, also suggesting that's what they anticipated to be coming to market through the as we tried to recover from the pandemic. Then on page 16, we come into the more recent office sales. There's 3 of them there. 383 Dover Court was at 7.23%. 433 Main was at 7.66%, and 870 Portage was at 6.97%. And again, we had reference to that data in addition to the capitalization rates that were indicated pre-pandemic. And so as a result of all of that information and the survey and everything that was going on, we come to our conclusions on page 17. And for our purposes, as you see, there's a suburban office, good quality suburban office. Our Class S capitalization rate conclusion is between 6 and 7.5%. And we're suggesting in this case a slight increase from 6.4% to 6.5% in our valuation. So that is then capitalization rate study. So again, I'll just briefly go back, and you need not turn there if you don't want to do so, but with respect to our valuation submission, then we're applying the 5% non-recoverable, we're applying an overall market rent of $14, and we're applying a capitalization rate of 6.5%. When added to the parking valuation, it results in a total indicated value of $3,412,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Spacek, any questions?
I have no questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Remper, do you have any questions?
I do. I'm just wondering, you mentioned several times that there's a landlord-tenant relationship.
There it is, yes.
Can you elaborate on what kind of an impact that might have on things like the vacancy rate for this property?
Certainly. So, I mean, the quick answer is at any point if and I'm going to call it the whole co-opco. So at any point if the owners, and I'm treating the owners as the same owners of the two companies, if they decided the space wasn't big enough for them anymore and they had to go to market, or if they decided that they didn't need all the space, at the end of the day, they would be certainly impacted as a whole co-opco structure in the very same manner that someone who was just leasing it out to a third-party tenant would be. So the changes, if they needed more space, less space, that would have a direct impact on them and the vacancy rate in the building. The 6% certainly, and the boards have been, very consistent in terms of the market allowance at 6%. It represents the best estimate to use for an income approach. We're not valuing it in use, and we're not valuing it as an owner occupied in the income valuation. So if I understand your question correctly, my suggestion would very much be you wouldn't change the 6% because then you're valuing it in use with a specific ownership and operating structure that is specific to the property, as opposed to what would an investor coming to this property typically use for a vacancy allowance for, for a good quality building that's got, very, very good. It doesn't suffer from chronic vacancy. So the 6% allowance, I'd suggest you wouldn't be impacted by the whole co-opco structure. They'd be, consider using the same considerations as a third-party investor would when they're looking at the value in the building.
The other thing I'm wondering about is the assessor went through the COVID checklist, and you've taken us through your report, or a portion of your report, which indicated the factors that COVID has had. And I'm wondering, the assessor indicated that the impact for this property was simply that they had to pay for precautionary measures. I'm assuming face masks, hand sanitizer, etc. That was the only expense they had for this particular.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not suggesting expenses. Oh, you're absolutely right, Mr. Rimple. I'm not suggesting any non-recoverable expenses should be increased because of the pandemic, because $12,000 as an additional expense, and that's from the questionnaire, it's immaterial. But what's very, very relevant is what are the economic conditions in which the property, forget about the COVID questionnaire, but what are the economic conditions in which the property is operating, and what do investors believe is happening with things like rental rates and specifically cap rates? So certainly, in the questionnaire, they put moderate impact, and then they've gone through everything and listed one additional expense of $12,154. So in and of itself, on the expense side, not a big deal at all. But when one's looking at what do we believe that, what would an investor be looking at in terms of the risk to this property using the income approach to value, the pandemic is really important, and it fundamentally affects the investor's expectations of future risk. That's where I'm coming from with that, but not the additional expenses, not at all.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchings, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reimer, I'm just trying to understand the owner. Is it owner occupied? This building?
So the quick answer, Mr. Hutchings, is no, but it's a holding company that holds the real estate in an operating company, Phoenix Enterprises, that operates in it, and they are affiliated. It's common shareholders and directors.
Okay.
But there's two entities. To answer your question, there's two legal persons.
Okay.
So strictly speaking, it's not owner occupied.
Okay. Is it a property management company?
It is indeed.
Okay.
Like that's the occupant, or again, property management company that's affiliated with the occupant.
Okay. And it's just the one, we'll call one tenant in here. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to review their income and expense statement.
I did.
On this property. Okay. Did you consider it at all when doing your valuation?
Absolutely not, because I know they're corporate affiliates. I went to market, went to the market data and based it on that.
Okay. And my last question would be, this subject property compared to the comparisons that you used, would you consider this to be a superior location, superior property to the comparisons?
No, not a superior location. Certainly the Portage Avenue comparables, it's 1661 Portage, which is also, it's right on Portage. It's a very good location. And Border Street, actually, Mr. Spacek and myself had one of the same comps on Border, and I had some other ones there. Quality though, and again, Mr. Hutchings, as I've said, this the quality of this property is good. It's a newer build, and they had that new addition. But the quality of the Portage Avenue property, they've also had a very large, substantial sums of money spent on it, which also brought the effective age up on that one. So, but certainly, no doubt, this is the asset is a good quality asset, without question.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all my questions.
And Sir Reimer, I'm just looking at the photograph of the premises, and I see, I guess I'm looking on page 3 of the city's brief, and I didn't notice it before. I just noticed it just now. But I see it says Globe General on it.
Yes.
And I have to just tell you, I just noticed this just now, but the owner of Globe General happens to be a first cousin of mine.
Ah, okay.
And I really should not be hearing his matters.
Okay.
I feel that they want to ask me for the questions at this point, or do anything.
Understand.
And I think that I have to retract on this, which means that only 2 people have a hand.
Understand.
And I will not, obviously, also participate in the deliberations on that. I'll leave room for it.
Understood.
Okay. Okay, so I want to know that also you too, Mr. Spacek. If I noticed this earlier, I would have tried to get somebody else to hear this matter. And it was only when I looked at the photograph right now. Saw that. As a matter of fact, I only do the photograph because I happened to be on my bicycle in this area recently. I noticed the building was, before this, I thought it was maybe the pancake house we're dealing with. My location was anyway, so my apologies. I hope that everybody is okay with two people deliberating on this because I think that ordinarily three are required.
I have no concerns.
Okay.
No issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have no questions and that will limit my participation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so all the questions have now been asked then, so we'll go on then with the next matter, which is 3025 Portage Avenue. Mrs. Patrick, when you're ready, you can proceed.
Sounds good. I have another recommendation. I just need to load up the right thing here. Take me one moment. I opened the wrong one. All right, so 3025 Portage. This is roll number 0743826210. We have a 2023 total assessment of $7,687,000, and I am asking for a reduction to $7,035,000.
We're in agreement?
And you're in agreement?
Yes.
Mr. Ashley, do you have any questions on this one?
Yes, thank you. Can the assessor explain what the adjustment was made on that recommendation?
Yes, I can. So let me open up a workup quick, and I'll explain it exactly. So for me to get that total value, this property is split up into it has 4 income streams, but the majority value of the property comes in the OFB portion at the back. This was I made a small reduction in rent from $12.76 to $12.50 to get closer to the actuals that were obtained. We have a retail a restaurant portion of this property, 2,500 square feet. We had a model rent of approximately $34.56. I adjusted to $26 to match more of a net rent that was actually in place. We have a parking structure on there that I kept the same value, $460,000, and then we had an OFS where where there's a front portion of the property in front of that OFB that's a standard, kind of more of a standard office, and again adjusted the rent by 18 cents. I'm just taking one more peek here, but I just adjusted the cap slightly for the OFB to get to that total value to represent it being a little more outside of downtown than most of our other OFBs, and that's how I came to that total value.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Spencer, just one question. So what was the cap adjusted to?
Well, so we had 4 portions. The only cap adjustment I made was from the for the OFB portion of the property. It was at 675, and I adjusted it to 7%.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll proceed with the next property, which is 3303 Portage Avenue.
Yeah.
Mr. Joshua, when you're ready on that one.
Thank you. So we have 3303 Portage Avenue. We're looking at roll number 073226600000. We have an original assessed value of $1,376,000 for 2023, and I am asking for a reduction and I'm asking for a reduction to $845,000, and this is a property that I've recently dealt with for past years, but I do know there is a vacancy issue with your property. It reports very high vacancy every year. So we had a vacancy of 6%. I adjusted that upwards to 21, and adjusted the overall rent of the building to 1040 from 1176, just to give that total value of 845,000. But again, we're just trying to better represent how this building's actually been performing and struggling the last numerous years.
We're in agreement.
Okay. And you did explain, but just in case any further explanations required, Mr. Will give me the questions. Okay, Mr. Hutchins.
No, I'm good, thank you.
And Ms. Locke, thank you. Okay, so we're next on to 150 Moray Street.
Mr. Chairman, can I interject on this one?
You can.
150 Moray is one of the school division properties that is the subject of the application to King's Bench regarding the exemption. Thankfully, that hearing was actually held a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, we don't have the decision of the court yet, but this appeal was filed simply as a protective measure pending the results of that application. So again, for the sake of brevity, we're not disputing at this stage any component. We're just keeping it active until such time as we have the decision of the court.
So you're asking us to
Yeah, as is. Yeah.
Okay. So that takes us to 3081 Nass Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are at roll number 074359702000 3081 Ness. We have a 2023 value of 1,392,000. I'm asking it be confirmed. If you turn to my page 2, we have a pretty standard 2-story OFS built in 1977 with still an effective year of 1977. We have a gross floor area of 9,536 and a total leasable square footage of 8,939. You can see this is located on Ness Street, as my page 2 shows. This is west of Sturgeon. You can see a picture of the property at the bottom of page 2. If we turn to page 4, you can see pretty standard valuation for this one, follows all our OFS parameters. We have a model driven rent of $12.26 for the main floor, 4,446 square feet. We have $10.83 for the second floor of 4,493 square feet. If you look at the vacancy, we're following our OFS parameters for the cycle, 6%, 3% for expenses, $8 for shortfall again, and this is being derived with a 6.45% cap. And again, I went over the comparables. I'm using the same chart, but if we look, this comparable, or this subject property that's 8,000 square feet, our other property we looked at with these comparables was a little larger. So if you go towards the bottom of my comparables, you'll see at least ones that are more similar in size, but we have a range of, the comparable 14, 765 portage, 6,000 square feet of space going for $11. And then if you go up, you can see the square footage is increasing. Comparable 9 is 13, or comparable 10, 75 Squarefield Boulevard, unit 3, you're getting 9,000 square feet at 1350. And you can see the range that I'm showing of the lower square footages range from 11 up to 1550, or even up to 1350 for the 917. For the 9,179 square foot comparable 10. And just so you're aware, the blended rate for this property for the first and second floor works out to $11.54 a square foot. So if you're looking at the overall rate applied to the whole square footage, it's $11.54. And again, it's owner occupied, so the mailer on page 9 doesn't show too much useful information for us, but they do report expenses. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just the same question, Mr. Spacek, the 3% non-recoverable allowance and the 645 cap, those are model derived.
Yes, they're all model derived for the character, based on the characteristics of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Sure, do you have any questions?
I'm just wondering with regards to your photo of the outside of the building, when that might have been taken.
That photo is from Google Maps, and it's the 2000. I can double check, but I believe it's around 2020 or 2018. It's there's usually those are the two sliders I'll use.
Thank you. And I have no questions, thank you. So, Mr. Remy, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So in our main brief, if I could ask the board members, let me see if I can get my mental math right this time. Oh, I actually have the page number. Okay, if I could ask the board members, Mr. Spacek, to turn to page 15 briefly, please. Should be the income approach valuation summary. Everyone's there.
Hey, yeah, I'm there.
Okay, so the only issues under debate from our perspective relate to the non-recoverable expense allowance. Again, we're suggesting 5% rather than 1%, and the capitalization rate. So this is an older office building, the 1977 age, and pardon me, I won't dwell on it because market rent is not an issue, but the comparables that we also considered on the previous page need not turn there, but it's the same chart that we were looking at with the prior appeal. And certainly based on this property, the overall rent of $103,000 change certainly made sense to us, and we believe it was consistent with market. So this then distills to the non-recoverable expenses for the reasons I mentioned. We believe should be restored at 5%, and the capitalization rate, pardon me, based on the study, this being a somewhat older building and given the location and the quality, quality and such, we're suggesting, in consideration of the market indicators and everything we've talked about in terms of the outlook, that 7% in this particular case would be appropriate, and that then results in a value of $1,223,000. Thank you.
Mr. Patrick, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Remy, do you have any questions? I have no questions. Mr. Hutchins, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
This one's pretty good, so I don't think that, thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to agenda item number 8, 395 Berry Street. Mr. Patrick, when you're ready.
We will finish off with one more recommendation here. We're at 395 Berry, roll number 0702189200. We have a 2023 original assessment of $3,218,000. Again, 2-story OFS office built in 1961. We have a lease value of $24,045. Do have a workup here. So I am making a recommendation, and Carrie, you'll have to tell me if this is right, to reduction to $2,498,000.
And I agree.
Okay, and what really it's just a reduction of some rent based on some of the actuals and market, and I have made a slight increase in vacancy by 1% to represent some of the higher vacancy it's experienced, and and then a reduction of $72,000 for an adjacent lot that it uses for parking. So that's how I get to that total value.
Thank you. Sessions, do you have any further questions on?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it broke up on me. Could I get that recommended value, please?
Yeah, no problem. It's $2,498,000.
498. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Sir, do you have any questions? Yeah, no, you did, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So this completes all items on the agenda. We'll deliberate and render our decisions. And thank you very much, Mr. Reimer and Mrs. Lesher.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.